Hey, it's Flintoid again with another Disc Priest exclusive video from beta. So today I'm going to be discussing the artifact weapon, what traits you should be picking and what traits you should be pretty much ignoring altogether. So the thing about the artifact weapon is that it is really, really important that you get your path right, because if you don't get your path right, it's going to cost hundreds of thousands of artifact power in order to get the, I guess, optimal route. So for example, I made this video mainly because I fell victim to this. So I picked the wrong stuff for my artifact weapon and I totally screwed myself over. Right now it cost me, oh goodness, 31,000 artifact power per trait, which just goes up exponentially. And I'm not even to the best trait, like my best powerful trait yet. So we'll get started. So your artifact weapon table is in the very back of your order hall. So this is your order hall, and then if you run up here, there are these stairs, you'll run up to this little interactive altar here. So we're going to click on this, and it's going to bring up all of the traits that you can get as on your artifact weapon. So you spend artifact power and come here, and this is how you equip these traits. Once you have enough artifact power, you unlock each rank. The first rank costs 100 artifact power. The second one, I believe, is 400 or 200, and it just keeps going up and up and up and up and up until eventually it hits just hundreds of thousands. These up here are relics that you're going to use to empower your item level, which will increase the spell power, or intellect, excuse me, on your weapon, as well as some of the other stats. And then it'll also buff like random traits as well. So that's really nice. Really important to get relics. There's a quest line to unlock them as you go along. So let's get right into it. Your Light's Wrath draws upon the power of light. So this is the first trait you're going to get right off the bat. Basically what it does is it channels for, I think it's, yep, about 2 seconds, a little over 2 seconds, and then it blasts the enemy with a big burst damage, single target, and it increases its power 10% based on your how many people are affected by atonement. So the idea is to get as many people as you can affected by atonement, and then you use your Light's Wrath and then just blow up for a massive damage and healing boost. So that's the first one, and then you have no choice but to go into this one, which is called Invoke the Light. Increases damage dealt by Smite by 15%. This is really good. Smite creates like a damage absorption plus counts towards your atonement healing, towards your damage, really strong. So then you have two options here. The first real choice in the tree, Confession, which increases the damage dealt by your penance by, this should be 12%, but it says 16 because I have one of these active. Or Shield of Faith. So that increases the damage absorbed by Power Word Shield by 15%. So Power Word Shield's a little weaker, a lot weaker this X-Pack than it was in Warlords of Draenor, but it's still a really good spell. It applies Atonement, it still gives like it's instacast. Now there's no Weakened Soul, even though it's on a 6-second cooldown, you can refresh a shield. So Shield is still viable in Warlords, in Legion, and should be used almost on cooldown, I would say. So this is kind of tricky, but you're going to want to ignore this penance damage for now. And the reason being is because our first goal is, it seems awkward, but I promise it is the optimal way to go, is to go right to Sins of the Many. So you're going to want to skip this one, Power of the Dark Side, and you're going to want to go straight to Sins of the Many. So doing that, we need Light's Wrath, Invoke the Light, 3 ranks into Shield of Faith, so by the 3rd rank it'll be 15%. And then Darkest Shadows, increases healing done by Shadow Men by 10%. This is actually really good. So for Mythic Plus dungeons, Heroic dungeons, where people are kind of undergeared, this is going to be crucial. Shadow Mend is basically flash heal in Warlords of Draenor. You use it to quickly single target, heal them up. It also applies Atonement, which is really nice. So you apply Atonement, and then freaking blast your target. So 10% is really nice. You're going to want to ignore, please ignore Burst of Light. Power Word Radiance increases, increased healing by, this should be 15%, but again, I have another relic equipped. Power Word Radiance is pretty much only good at spending Atonement. The healing on it is really, really low. God, I think it's, let's see what we got here. Power Word Radiance, so it's 91k at 864 item level. That's really low. Shadow Mend is 250k to kind of put that in perspective. And like increasing, and this is with the buff, so without this 15-20%, this wouldn't even be 90k. This would be like 18k less than this, so what, like 72k, which is bad. So you're going to want to skip Radiance, skip Power of the Dark Side for now, and go straight to Edge of the Dark and Light. So the Shadow Word Pain increases by, this should be 15% again, but my relics make it 20. This is really good. It's an active hot, it's an active dot. It's basically like combining Renew and Shadow Word Pain together because of Atonement. It's a really good trait. If you pick the talent Purge the Wicked, it actually switches this to Purge. Increases damage dealt by Purge the Wicked. See, so if I change that out, it says Shadow Word Pain. And this is for the burst damage on Purge the Wicked too, so it's really nice. Going on to Borrowed Time, this is probably, arguably the best trait in here when it's maxed out. Borrowed Time, applying Atonement to a target increases the cast time of your next Smite or Light's Wrath by 10%, or causes the next Penance to channel for 10% faster. So what you can actually read this as is every time you apply Atonement, which is going to be very often, you know, with Shadow Mend, Radiance, Power Word Shield, Plea, every time you apply Atonement, it's going to give you 15% haste for both Penance and Smite, which is part of your core rotation. So basic rotation for Disc Priest will, like damage rotation, will be something like, I don't know, Power Word Shield, yourself or some target, and then Schism, Penance, Smite, 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 Schism, Penance, Smite, Smite, Smite. So this is going to be pretty insane for making your just a flat haste buff every time you apply. No, it doesn't stack, so it's not like if I apply 3 atonements in once with Power Word Radiance that it will give me a 45%. It'll just give you the same 15% buff every time, but it's still really strong. And then you get into your first major talent, which is increases the damage you deal by 1% per ally affected by Atonement. So for dungeons, this is you're typically gonna have 3 people with Atonement on it at any time, I would say on average. If you're out gearing the dungeon, it's going to be more like 2. If you're under gearing the dungeon, it's going to be more like 4. For raids, you're typically going to have anywhere between 5 and 7 Atonement out at a time during like moderate damage, maybe 10 during heavy damage, and maybe like 5 during light damage, 3 to 5 during light damage. So this is really good. Basically a 3 to 5% increase to your damage, which is conversely also an increase to your healing. So that's the initial path you're going to want to take. So Light's Wrath, Invoke the Light, Shield of Faith, Darkest Shadows, Edge of Dark and Light, Borrowed Time, and Sins of the Many. So that is the optimal path you want to take. If you stray from this path, it's going to be extraordinarily difficult to get these end talents. I've tested for, so I messed up. As you can see, I picked the wrong talents. right off the bat, and it is taking me forever to acquire enough artifact power to get the trait I should have gotten a long time ago. So next, what do you do? So after you get the Sins of the Many, what do you do? So there's a couple different options here based on your playstyle, but I'm going to say your best bet is going to skip Burst of Light and get this Confession. So that 12% on Penance is nothing to be ignored. That is pretty big considering you're pretty much going to keep Penance on cooldown because of how strong it is. And then after you get the Confession, you're going to want to get your second talent, which is Power of the Dark Side. Obviously you'll get Burst of Light, so put 3 ranks in this and then 1 into Power of the Dark Side. Now, this won't be a huge power buff for Disc Priest, like a power spike or anything. Power of the Dark Side has an internal cooldown, unless they change it, but I don't see them changing it with Legion being 2 weeks away, not even. Power of the Dark Side's internal cooldown is something like 50 seconds. So this can only proc every 50 seconds, so a chance for your damage dealt by your next penance by 50%. So first it has to be procced by Purge of the Wicked or Shadow Word Pain. So then it will proc like a buff that you have that will last for, I think it's 15 seconds. And then you have 15 seconds to cast a penance. And then that penance will do 50% more damage. So for example, my penance does 200k right now. It would do 300k. Which is, it's okay. It's a nice, like, passive buff you get. Once per minute though kind of sucks. I wish the proc rate on it was much higher. This would be pretty good if it was 30 seconds, and insane if it was any lower than that. So that's why I don't think you should take it first. No, you definitely shouldn't take it first. Because it's just really unpredictable. You'll pretty much get your first Purge of the Wicked proc the first 30 seconds of a fight if you have your Shadow Word Pain active, and then after that it'll be approximately every minute. Which is okay. It adds 600, well, right now at my item level it would add about 600k DPS to like your average boss fight, like raid boss fight, and then I like 300k healing, which isn't too bad I guess, but it feels bad because you gotta take Power Word Radiance times 3 into it, and that's a terrible healing spell. It's great for spreading atonement though. So enough about that. So then after you take your Confession followed by your second trait, you're going to want to, you're definitely going to want to take Doomsayer next. So increases duration of Rapture by 1 second. So this goes up to 3 seconds. And then, I mean, for obvious reasons, since Power Word Shield doesn't have a cooldown now, you can just keep spamming it. During a raid fight, what you're going to want to do, since Power Word Shield falls off after 15 seconds, what you're going to want to do is about 12 seconds before damage goes out, like a big burst of damage or just constant ticking damage, depending. About 10 to 12 seconds, you're going to pop Doomsayer, pop like a trinket or like a power infusion, and just spam the raid in bubbles. Just pop, 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 pop. And then by that time, everyone will have atonement, and when the damage comes in, the damage will get absorbed by all that shielding, and then everyone has atonement on them, because atonement lasts for 15 seconds, so they'll have 5 seconds of atonement on them. So then you're going to burst with your Schism, Penance, Light's Wrath, or some combination of that, and you're going to supply so much utility and healing to your raid. Disc Priests are super undervalued right now, and they're really overpowered, in my opinion. So then after Doomsayer, obviously, you're going to take Pain is in your mind. Pain Suppression, event at 3rd rank, this is 30 seconds. It seems pretty lackluster, because it still only puts your Pain Suppression on a 3-minute, 30-second cooldown, which means It's really iffy. Maybe on a long fight you might use it twice, but it's really iffy if you're going to use it twice. There's a legendary that makes pain suppression just nuts. Basically putting pain suppression on an almost 2-minute cooldown, which means you'll use it a lot in a fight. But 30 seconds is really not that useful for a raid setting, I should say. For dungeons, it's really good. PvP, it's really good. So, and then you're gonna get Barrier of the Devoted, increases healing done by your atonement, by 100% for targets within your power word barrier. So this is really strong, basically doubling your atonement healing, which will be your highest heals for sure. The only downside is they have to be within your barrier. So it's going to be exclusive for raid content, pretty much exclusive for raid content, where people have to remain stacked and a bunch of damage is coming in, and so it's going to be situational. That's why it's going to be the last trait you take, because it's the only one in here that is extremely situational. But it's really powerful. I actually consider taking the second because of how powerful it can be in certain situations. But I mean, obviously it's not consistent. There's going to be some fights where you barely use this at all. So you'll take that third as your third major talent. And from here, the only talents remaining are Speed of the Pious, Share in the Light, Taming Shadows, and Vestments of Discipline. So your Fade reduces damage you take. You move 30% faster when casting Penance. And casting Power Word Shield on yourself also applies a mini shield on you. And Taming the Shadows, Shadow Mend has a 15% chance to deal no damage. So I'm going to start with worst in here. You absolutely do not want to take Taming the Shadows. It should be the last thing you take. It is so bad. First of all, it's a 15% chance. So it's random that your Shadow Mend will deal no damage, which most of the time Shadow Mend doesn't deal that much damage anyway, because the damage gets absorbed so fast. And in Mythic Dungeons, as soon as you're out of combat, Shadow Mend's dot doesn't even occur. So this would only be viable for like a raid, not even a raid setting. It's just really bad. Don't take it. It's the last one you should take. Next, the strongest one that's left is Share in the Light. So after you finish your third talent, you're going to want to get Share in the Light. It just basically 15% more healing on your Power Word Shield, essentially. It's pretty good. And not much to say about it, really. It's just a more passive throughput on your Power Word Shield. Next is your option. Speed of the Pious would be really good for like PvPers, where you move 30% faster while casting Penance. It's basically like applying, what's that? Body and Soul on you. Pretty close. 40% for Body and Soul, 30% for Speed of the Pious, to give you a reference. But the only... Yeah, I would take this. It's 1 rank. I'd pick that first before this Fade. So this Fade, I've got a trick. So even though this will be like the second to last talents you're gonna take, there's a trick associated with it. If you macro this so that you cast Fade and like Power Word Shield at the same time, you don't have to think about that 10% damage reduction that you're gonna do. You're just gonna naturally take 10% damage for 6 seconds, and Fade's on a 30-second cooldown, I believe. Let's check here. Yep, 30-second cooldown. So basically, without thinking about it, 20% of the time you're going to be taking 10% less damage. Which is decent. That means an average throughout an entire fight, throughout an entire PvP, you just basically take 2% less damage with this talent. But you must macro it to like Power Word Shield or something you spam a lot if you don't want to think about it. You can save this as as a cooldown, but Fade's not really worth a GCD unless you're in like a dungeon setting and taking a bunch of aggro. So that's my opinion on Fade. So let's see if I got that macro actually that I can show you real quick before I No, I don't. But basically, it's basically just cast slash cast fade slash cast power word shield. If you want to do a mouse over, you can do the mouse overs on you too. Then, like I said, the last one you're going to take is Taming the Shadows. And the only reason I would take that is so you unlock your center one, which then increases your damage and healing per rank. I think it's 0.5%. 0.5%? It's either 0.5 or 1%. You can't even see it until you unlock all your talents. Up here, oh, I forgot to mention, every point you put in, you increase your stamina and then increase your damage dealt by 0.5% for disc. So all other healers, this is increase your healing done by 1%, or maybe it's 0.5%. I think it is 0.5%. But for disc, it's damage because, and honestly, I prefer this because of atonement. But I've heard that that damage doesn't count towards of atonement, which is really awkward. I don't know. I'd have to do more testing on that. I have to confirm that. But anyway, so that is the disc artifact weapon tree. Which ones you should take? Remember, go straight to Sins of the Many, pick up Confession, and then pick up Power of the Dark Side after. After that, it's whatever, right? Like, whatever, if you are a PvPer, pick Speed of the Pious or whatever next. But honestly, you're going to really screw yourself if you don't go to Sins of the Many first, pick up Confession, and then Power of the Dark Side. Everything else is just kind of trivial, just kind of preference. But definitely pick those first. Alright. Good luck, my Disc Priest brothers.